I'm a big believer in shipping. We even have a picture in the office. Yes, we ship actually in all our offices. And I'm a big believer in just like accelerating that time to value. So, we look at a couple of different ways.
Welcome to the CTO Compass podcast. I'm your host, Mark Wormhoort, tech strategist and executive coach. In every episode, we meet tech leaders, from startup CTOs to enterprise CIOs, to explore what it means to lead in tech today. They share their stories and their lessons so that you can navigate your own journey in tech. Let's dive into today's episode. Hello everyone. Today's guest started to build AI before the hype cycle even began. Before that even, he helped create PyMC3, which is a Python statistical modeling and probabilistic machine learning library, quite interesting. And he is the CTO and co-founder of AudioStack, basically an enterprise platform that takes audio production from weeks and it brings it down to seconds. He's advised the UK government on scaling AI in creative tech. Absolutely amazing guy. Welcome, Peadar Coyle. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks for having me, Mark. That intro was pretty accurate. Spent a lot of time writing code and spent a lot of time building teams in the past couple of years, and was lucky to be part of the AI wave before the AI wave took off. So sometimes you're in the right place at the right time.
And tell me about that, because I think that's really interesting. You started AudioStack, which is an AI company around audio in 2019, and it was way before the GPT hype, before anything else came out. What is it that you saw in 2019 that not a lot of other people saw?
I don't think it was possible to predict things like GPTs, right? But I think you could have like a reasonable thesis that like machine learning technology in general would improve. And we were sort of betting on things like synthetic speech technology to just get to human quality, in the same way that I think we saw in translation. I think translation was kind of our reference point. Now, I think there's risk involved in that, but you need to have a thesis before you set up a company, or a reasonable thesis about what kind of like external trends will tend your way. And I think you see a lot of the companies who are quite successful in this AI wave have been doing some version of ML or some adjacent technology for a long period of time. I mean, OpenAI has been around for like, I think over a decade now. So, so I think that's kind of like, the technological inflection point in itself, like, wasn't, that you probably can't predict, but you can predict that, something will happen in a certain area. I think that's kind of the only way you can approach these things.
And your background before that, I saw that you were mastered as a mathematician.
Yeah,
What's
yeah,
your
yeah.
original background?
I study mathematics and physics to various degrees. I've always been using computers. Like, my father was a computer teacher, so I grew up very much programming or hacking to some degree since for the last 20 years.
So you had a really good understanding already of machine learning models before the AI hype really came around.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff I did in math and stats was very kind of computational.
Nice. So, and you started this company, AudioStack, which is really around applying AI and AI models, machine learning models to audio. You started the company in 2019, and then suddenly 2-3 years later, this whole GPT hype and wave comes around. How did your company actually survive all of that?
Well, it wasn't just me. I have two co-founders, Timo and Bjorn. I think it's very difficult to set up a company without co-founders. Um, in terms of like navigating the wave, we were like, we were building products and we were working, we had customers and stuff like that around that time. One thing we did notice was that there was like a inflection point in terms of like interest, around the time of, kind of ChatGPT moment. It very much became, people had the language as such on the buyer side to sort of ask about it. A lot of that was kind of exploratory at that time. And I think that's what we've probably seen the last 2 to 3 years.
So it's also been a huge benefit for you then, because buyers now actually understand what it is that you do.
Um, I think buyers' level of understanding is evolving. Like, so I definitely think you see you see the rise of AI councils and organizations as they try to get their heads around these things. You you see buyers becoming various levels of sophistication. And you see buyers worried about things like data protection, data residency, all these kind of things, very much on the, and even things like, sharing their data, with, for training data with kind of large technology companies. Um, so I'd say they had a bit of a mental model and had a mental model that could be transformative, but there's still like a kind of a change management process ongoing in a lot of organizations.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of learning with your buyers or all the
Yeah,
buyers that are out there.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And still, I've noticed, I've seen it. You've raised some funding, but we live in a world now where some of your peers, right, the true AI tech giants, they raise hundreds of millions in a single round. How do you create defensibility for your company?
Um, I think defensibility is often kind of focused on, like, as silly as it sounds, listening to your customers, right? Because I think by listening to your customers, you often discover the workflows that are actually important as opposed to like the superficial workflows. I think, like, like building up, like, kind of, deep subject matter knowledge, both on the kind of go-to-market side, on the creative side, allows you to bring these learnings into the product. And that fundamentally over time becomes much more stickier and defensible moat, because you've worked with them, you've built at scale, you've built trust, you've understood their problems in, like, in kind of a deep way. And arguably, I think if you're building a really great product, you should understand your customers' problems deeper than they understand. And I think that's quite difficult to, you can build stuff, but that's quite difficult to kind of copy overnight. So that's like a kind of a moat, I believe.
Just a better customer understanding than these really large companies, which are basically everyone's their customer, or that's what it seems like sometimes. So, what is it that AudioStack actually does? Give me a quick explanation of the kind of customers you have and what are the services that you provide to them.
Sure. We accelerate the production of audio production. So we're about, 99 to 100 times faster than existing workflows. And existing workflows are often, human in the loop, or voice actors are involved in studio. Our customer base is largely media and entertainment companies, although some of the larger brands in the world. And we enable them to communicate with our customers by doing advertising. But we also have customers in the, kind of audiobooks and podcasting space as well.
Okay. So, basically, and I think what you said in your documentation is that you enable one to many plays. So, you let a small team operate like a big one.
Yeah.
How does that work and what does that mean?
Um, I think fundamentally, if you take like an unscalable process and like look at making it scalable, you kind of like, you open up like net new activity. So like a concrete example is, some of our customers use us to build ads where they're, building an ad for each particular store. And you couldn't do that sort of thing beforehand because it'd be just cost prohibitive, boring. Your error rate would be quite high. So that sort of ability to sort of take, kind of one creative asset and like turn that into multiple assets and sort of, do both things like experimentation, which also applies to the performance side, but also like allows you to, kind of fundamentally do net new activity that I think you weren't able to do before.
Okay, that makes it. No, and I like that analogy, right? Of taking an unscalable process and making it scalable through, well, AI, audio in your case. So, how do you believe that AI is doing that for? I mean, you're in technology, you're a CTO. Where do you see the same thing or the same method playing up in technology? With your teams, maybe. I mean, you have a tech team, or in the tech industry, the wider tech industry.
Sorry, is your question like, where do I see AI affecting kind of workflows?
Yeah, in that same space, right? Where you have an unscalable process, maybe that suddenly become, like you said, scalable. But then in our business, well, in the business of technology?
Yeah, I think like we experiment and we use a lot of the kind of modern tools of Cursor, Lovable. I think, I think, I think someone in the team is using pretty much every new tool that comes out. So you know, and we do a lot of sharing of knowledge about that. One thing that I think is quite scalable, so two things I think are quite scalable that like I think were kind of hard to do before is like things like spinning up testing quite quickly. So we've had quite a lot of success at like sort of reclaiming older code, like people didn't really understand, put some tests on this, bring some stability, which generally would have been quite clunky and labor intensive, but also like things like rapid prototyping. So so I was doing some stuff of this recently. Rather than going to the developer team and asking for a prototype, I was able to hack it together in Cursor and have a quick prototype that we could actually have a proper conversation, internally about, oh no, but we wouldn't do it like that, or the text is wrong. And normally like that would go to like a design team and that would probably go into a roadmap. And to be honest, like some of this kind of adjacent like marketing or just experimental stuff just never got progress. Just never worked. I've seen many a roadmap where this stuff just sat there and nothing happened. So I think it's that, you know, not just like turning the unscalable into scalable, but turning the non-done work into done work, right? And that's, I think, is like the kind of the underappreciated thing about a lot of AI. Like we open up like new possibilities where we weren't able to.
So not just about speeding up the work that we were already doing before and making it slightly more efficient, but doing the work that just didn't get done before.
Yeah,
I like
of
it. Well,
course.
nice. So, and then to get on, and this is one of your, I think, your design philosophies, which I'd really like to hear more about. You talk about thin wrappers in the AI era, right? Versus thick wrappers or a thick platform. What does that mean?
My understanding of that is that you can build like very thin things around ChatGPT or whatever. You can build kind of a prototype around that. You can build these things quite fast. Um, but like I think like the real challenge becomes about like the real challenge becomes like about bringing in the business logic, or the kind of complexity of the business logic, and then you become, I think, a thicker wrapper, or like like a thin versus thick. And I mean thick in terms of defensibility. I mean thick in terms of complexity. I mean thick as in harder to copy, but I also mean thick as in more value, right? Because I think that's one of the things you see with a lot of these kind of like simplistic, kind of like quick moving, kind of copycats or whatever. And you see that throughout the tech space at the moment. They don't have that kind of intricacy of, guardrails and the kind of more complex stuff that, an enterprise, will drive you towards, because it's not about the quick demo. It's about doing something reliably across a large team, and, with all their different challenges and opportunities internally, whether it's regulatory, whether it's their own brand guidelines, whether it's their own, kind of like compliance needs, that's all quite complicated. And that's like a kind of a thick thing. I think that, where a lot of the value in the AI era is going.
In a the thick layer that you create on top of a given AI model, whether that's ChatGPT or something else. Okay,
Yeah.
I understand.
Yeah. And you also have the advantage of like that the underlying models are improving, right? So you like that, the underlying models are improving. You can have like kind of backup models. That's also very important. But also like but then the underlying business challenge is still in that kind of like more thick work where you do these kind of other components on top of. And then I think there's a further question, which is, you know, I see a lot of companies are using large language models for very complicated models for things that large language models don't need to be used for. So, there's a whole thing about pulling out that and then replacing that either with your own IP, which is one possibility, or kind of other kind of IP that's out there, which can be more cost effective and can balance things from it, which is a kind of important thing for like, protecting your margins and stuff like that, which is also a very important thing in itself.
Yeah, no, I understand that. So, and then, like you said, these models, the providers, the models, they change, let's say, almost monthly, if not every 2 or 3 months. How do you look at changing that models and changeability? Should you just be ready and open to rip out ChatGPT and place it with Claude 4.5 or with the next Gemini model, or do you see more like just sticking to one provider? How do you build when you look at these models, or what would you advise someone?
Like we went on a bit of a journey on that. Like I don't think there was an easy answer at first. I think we did a lot of experimentation. One thing that we've got a lot more robust about, and we've built a lot of internal testing about, is making sure that the behavior for the customer is the same as before, right? So it's all well and good. If you're, selling to like a brand or an advertiser or whatever, large people we deal with, they don't want their thing to suddenly change overnight because they have already figured out, a certain way to use a tool, and change can be quite disruptive. So what we've done there is we built like an entire repository of tests and things we expect, and we run that through, and we use that as our kind of our evaluation process. And from that, we select, and generally not the leading models, actually, probably the models like, a few months after they're kind of like, in the wild and there's some sort of understanding of, because I think you could do too much change that could be disruptive, and also like the benefit's not always there. So that's kind of like, so we have this kind of robust testing framework, and that's what a lot of companies I've talked to in the ecosystem seem to be doing. We see the rise of kind of LM evals kind of based application. There's all these kind of testing applications out there, and there are even third parties you can deal with. There's a whole ecosystem, and the ecosystem is about kind of reducing hallucinations, but also like increasing customer trust. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if it's AI or magic or whatever, customers need to trust the results.
Yeah, true. And with AI, that is sometimes difficult. Okay. No, and I understand, right? I mean, we had, even when the models become better, we had 4.0 go to GPT-5, and then it was much better. And I still think it is a much better model, but the noise around it, just because the whole, right, everything changed in the model, it upset quite a few people in the way. And I think used to it, but that's going to keep happening, of course, when models evolve and adapt and change. A similar question, and this is more, and we're now going to go a bit more into the actual. I think we talked a lot about AI, a bit more into the technology, but a very similar question that I thought of because of the last one, and it's with infrastructure and network providers, or the providers that you use. How do you look at those? I mean, I've seen you do quite a bit with Amazon. Do you actually make everything Kubernetes or Docker so that you can just go from one provider to the next with your hosting and your infrastructure? Do you actually go all in on one provider? What's your infrastructure strategy, if I may ask?
We're pretty much all in on AWS. Mm, I think there's a lot of talk about kind of multi-cloud and, kind of flexibility there. I think like there's a cost to building that, and there's a cost to kind of building and abstracting the um the primitives there. That being said, we do use a lot of Docker, we do use a lot of Kubernetes, and we do, in terms of like things like looking for backup systems, we do look at like, experimenting with other systems. But, you know, I would say that, if you pick any of the major cloud providers and you have devs who are happy with it, like you're probably going to be okay. And like, but like the real reason we picked was I was very familiar with a lot of the engineers were, and I also could see that was quite easy to hire AWS skills on the market. I don't know if it's changed now, but there are other kind of, networking choices that would be like more complicated, I guess, to operation.
Price wise, I mean, they all look at each other, so they're never going to be that far apart
Yeah,
because they're
yeah,
copying each other
yeah,
constantly.
yeah.
Okay, and if we then go in your team, in your development team, overseeing a team of developers is hard, quite hard. So, what's the one metric that for you is most important with your team? What's the one thing that you look at with them?
I'm a big believer in shipping. We even have a picture in the office. Yes, we ship actually in all our offices. And I'm a big believer in like, just like accelerating that time to value. So, we look at it a couple of different ways, but broadly it's that. And I'm very interested in like, how do we accelerate, like how, for example, recently the team spent some time optimizing CI/CD pipelines because, going from a 20-minute build time to a 5-minute build time was, significant uplift, especially across, a wider, like, a wider engineering team. So, these sort of like optimization, but then there's other questions like, you know, how do you make your product team interface with and your designers interface with your engineering team in a more effective way? Like what kind of like what processes do you bring in? Like whether it's design documents, whether it's better testing, it's all these sort of things. But I think I'm a big believer in like you have to just keep shipping because like that iteration, as soon as you stop doing that, you stop having that iteration and I think morale drops, which is a very big problem. But also I think like, it becomes harder to respond to the market. Not everything we've shipped has been the right thing to ship. I don't think any engineering team gets that right, or any product team. But like, by at least getting stuff out there, you're doing that test and learn, and of course you're also keeping morale. And it's a big thing for us. And like even like when we have an intern join, we also try to get them to ship in their first week as well, which I think is important. Which shows, sort of helps the systems improve because if they can do it, they're probably quite easy to adopt. So I think it's all about those sort of things, and that's a multi-dimensional problem and an evolving problem. That can get more complicated as your infrastructure gets more bigger, as you have bigger clients. So it's all about like figuring out ways to keep that momentum going.
So, and just to make sure I got that right, I mean, time to value, or sorry, time to shipping, right? Time to value. That makes a lot of sense. Did you just say that when you onboard an intern, they can actually ship code or deliver code in their first week? Have you
Yeah,
built? Wow,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Within the first week, yeah. We've had a couple in the first couple of days, but yeah, the last one we had, he shipped something in his first week. So I think some of that's making things small, but some of that's just making sure that there's, stuff to work on and that, they can log into things and get up and running.
it's impressive. So, and then something else you said, and I really found that one interesting. One of the other hard problems in tech is, of course, keeping everyone aligned. How do you keep your tech team, your product team, customer support, infrastructure, go to market, your sales teams? How do you keep them all aligned on the same vision, direction, and use that as input to to what you're going to ship next?
I think those things are like ongoing, like battles, like and challenges as you get bigger. And some things work for a period of time, and then you have to like kind of like iterate through. Yeah, we kind of like monthly, like weekly meetings where we talk about like what's being shipped on product. We try to make sure we unblock each other. Quite a lot of the product team spend time either watching customer videos or with kind of customer facing people in the team. Um, we regularly communicate by Slack, by Zoom, by various other mechanisms. But I think, with multiple time zones and like new people coming in and stuff like this becomes like you have to, I think, build out, both things like your off sites, which are also very important because you need to allow your kind of leadership team time to speak together, like away from kind of operational load, but also your, making sure that, the team spends time with each other to build up trust, and also that you spend some of that time on the strategy side and some of that time on the operational side.
Very down to earth, practical items you're going to ship next. Okay. You have a background also in the open source community. You've contributed quite a bit. Delivering open source is quite different from working for a business. What have you learned from open source that is influencing how you lead your team today or how you work today?
Um, I think I think there's a big part about So I think one of the things open source taught me is that when it comes to making technological choices, right? Because I think like, tech strategy is one of the things that I think is very important. But like betting on the communities that seem to be growing or are active is a good proxy for like kind of future, so you don't need to, the products you're using or the languages you're using or even the library you're using don't need to be perfect now, but they do need to be, you know, better, like you can see fundamental development, and that they will improve over time. And that's, one reason why we picked React in our front end, one reason why we picked Chakra in kind of like some of our front end components, one reason why we use a lot of the Python community. And, of course, that also means that they will, even things like Kubernetes, is an open source community itself. So I think it's like, it's kind of betting on those things. The team's big believers in open source. Sometimes I push for like, oh, can't we just get a vendor to do that? And that becomes a bit of a discussion. And also just like being aware of like what kind of new things are out there, because like, like the space is evolving. So I think that's a big part. So like, so I guess like to summarize, look for a community and sort of lead into community and, also like, be involved in that, and sometimes the team will be contributing to some of these libraries, but also, you have to think about like the wider ecosystem and some of the trade-offs you're dealing with.
And in that sense, your open source community isn't that different from the paying customers that you have as a
Yeah.
business. Of course, I mean they provide your input and their needs and their business cases.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah.
Nice, that's cool. And then, I mean, you started small, but now AudioStack is working across at least a couple of different locations. You have London, but also Barcelona, New York. How do you lead your team across the time zones, or is your team just in one? And how do you manage across the different cultures and locations that you're in?
Most of engineering and product is in, oh no, all of engineering and product is in Barcelona or London. Um, so, there's we have other people, more go to market and operations in the US. Um, um, I think it's spending time together. It's like making sure there's some sort of like call so people can sync on. I think one thing I learned is as you have more time zones, you do have to lean more into async kind of like decision making. So like, and that's a little bit of a challenge because you have to like write things in a much more detailed way. You don't get the back and forth of clarification. That could, that means that you can hand things over to, to someone in a different, time zone, or who, who you can't quite sync up with. In terms of cultures, I think, um, I, I think that, you have to be like respectful of cultures, obviously, but also like, and a certain element of diversity is healthy, but you also have to kind of keep a bit of a monoculture corporately, if that makes sense, because you want to make sure that that sort of works across your different jurisdictions. And I think these are just, I don't have all the answers to these. I think these are ongoing um, things as you grow, and there definitely are those inevitable things like you're told in startups, like you're above 20 people, this becomes an issue, above 50 people, this becomes an issue, etc., etc. And then these are generally correct. Like you run into these kind of moments of growth and like organizational complexity. I think things like culture and stuff. That the other thing is like leaning into like, making sure that your values are like used in your recruiting process. And sort of like making sure like not just the kind of more skill level, but making sure you really lean into them and that you train the team also to sort of like be aware of that. That's one thing we realized in some of our debriefs whenever we were looking at hiring people. Sometimes people couldn't put their finger on it, but that turned out to reflect an underlying cultural value in itself.
Yeah, so and I love that statement as well. So you bring in people from different backgrounds, different culture, making sure that you have a diversity of people, but then enforcing almost a corporate monoculture so that you have one company culture across that diversity of people. It's nice. And then hiring for values that align with that monoculture. Did I summarize that correctly?
Yeah, I haven't spent much time thinking about this lately, but that feels about right to me, and definitely that's a thing. I think you want to make sure that that you have that, that that each office like looks the same, or or feels the same. Might not look, could be differences, but there should be a relatively homogenous experience, and that helps also with things like communication, understanding, and stuff like that.
Yeah. No, I understand. Okay, I want to go a bit more to the outside. Last year, you spoke in front of the UK House of Lords on scaling up AI and creative tech.
Sure.
Really interesting. What is it that you told them?
What did I tell them? It's all publicly available, so you can dig it out if you want. Um, I talked a lot about R&D tax credits and kind of some of the policy things that I encountered as an entrepreneur. I think that was important to bring up, and there are things governments can do, and I think governments often aren't aware of what's actually important and what's actually causing friction. Talked a lot about enabling great talent to come, which of course is an issue for a lot of countries out there, particularly like kind of like a AI talent arms race that we're currently part of, or at least that has been talked about. And also like things like some of the successful groups we are part of, Digital Catapult, for example, which was a government group which was actually very helpful at a particular stage, and maybe that the ecosystem needs stuff for a bit of a further stage than that. I think that's kind of broadly what I told.
Okay. Because from my perspective, I'm based in the Netherlands. It seems that it's becoming harder and harder for UK, the EU, other countries to compete in the world against US and China, which are just investing so much money and are just going at such speed. Still, it's cool to see companies like yours in the UK. What should we do more or better to compete globally?
In terms of how are you asking that question, for which point of view?
So, as well, let's say the UK, the EU, either from a government perspective or maybe from perspective as startup founders, what can we do to compete and keep up with the US and China?
Um, I think there's a bunch of good ideas out there, like making it easier to set up companies with like the EU Inc. thing in the EU, which is quite popular at the moment, or quite topical. I think making it easier for great talent to come in, and that's also can be beneficial. I think there's some things about like things like stock options and stuff like this, and incentivizing employees, and that I think is a bit, you know, fragmented throughout Europe at the moment. And could be, and definitely it could be more, more alignment, right? Because sometimes countries jump ahead and then other countries are behind. Um, but those are the main ones. I think there's also perhaps like deeper things about culture, and like also like I think America makes failing like very acceptable socially. I think that's something in Europe that we're not quite there yet.
And if I'm an individual founder, I'm going to build my next startup in the UK or in Europe in the AI space, something like AudioStack. What would your advice be?
I think the ecosystems have a lot of positive aspects to them. So I guess something like leaning into whatever is like good for you locally, kind of like figuring out what your competitive advantage is. I mean, London has a lot of great AI talent. That's one reason why we ended up setting up here. But yeah, it's something like that. But I don't think I have like a general answer to like such a like question. I think it depends, and sometimes just get started is the right answer, and sometimes don't get started is the right answer.
Just get started, ship value. Okay. And if you're now a startup founder or a CTO and you're starting, and I mean, you've been in this for 6 years, but let's say somebody's in their first year, what would your advice be to a CTO in this day and age of AI being everywhere?
Um, I would say figure out when you have to step away from like the critical path and step away at that point, right? So you don't have to do it immediately, but there will become some point when your team is big enough or your product is complicated enough that the rational thing is to step away. And I think that's sometimes something I see with other kind of executives. They hang on too long and they end up causing more issues than they're solving, right? So and some of that's like a mindset shift of going into what you're calling to be an executive or manager, and some of that's just like being comfortable learning a new kind of skill. But like you have to do that because you're probably severely inhibiting your ability.
Yeah. Knowing when to take a step back from being in a critical path everywhere. So, and then you said somewhere in the beginning, you said you have two co-founders, you're a team of three.
Yeah,
You said that's really important for a startup. What are the most important things? You now have quite a successful startup after these 6 years. What's the most important things that you've learned about running a startup and building a successful startup or scale up already?
most important thing. Um, I'd say like it's the cultivating your talent and keeping it attracting talent is probably your number one job, and like probably should not stop doing that. You don't need to be doing it like full time, but like there'll be points when you won't need to. But also, furthermore, it's really important to like incentivize people who are going above and beyond and giving them a path, and that's where like things like career path and stuff becomes important. And kind of smaller you are, it's probably less important. But you can always like sort of look for growth opportunities, and I think that this also pays off in a kind of a long run period, because if you can keep an engineer for 4 to 5 years, they like a lot of deep subject matter expertise and deep expertise in very highly productive, and that allows kind of a compounding effect, because like to kind of say like the kind of thick wrapper idea again, that stuff doesn't happen overnight, and it's, involves a lot of intricacy. So but I think also like a big thing for me and some of my co-founders was like making a good place that's to get creative work done, and I think a lot about that sort of stuff, because I think one thing that often happens whenever we're recruiting people is people say, "Well, I was so bored of my last job because I couldn't get anything done." Right, so you can often be competing for talent like that, so that's a kind of a an important thing vision wise or kind of culturally wise as well.
Nice. Um, and then for our listeners, there's a lot of CTOs, CIOs, people that are in tech leading. What would your final piece of advice be to them?
Have a play with all the new AI tools. They're very, very, very cool. Don't be scared of them. And also enable your team to be, you know, exploring these things, because I think that's where a lot of the kind of new, fresh ideas come from.
Also, let your engineers play. It's been incredible having you on. A lot of very valuable insights. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
As we wrap up another episode of the CTO Compass, thank you for taking the time to invest in you. The speed at which tech and AI develop is increasing, demanding a new era of leaders in tech. Leaders that can juggle team and culture, code and infra, cyber and compliance, all whilst working closely with board members and stakeholders. We're here to help you learn from others, set your own goals and navigate your own journey. And until next time, keep learning, keep pushing, and never stop growing.